Well, let's start talking about the film that everybody has just seen. And for me, it's a particular treat to see it on a big screen because I'd seen it last week again, and I saw it the first time it went out. And one of the things that's striking, and I'd like you to talk about, is that it's got a number of cultural, it's almost postmodern in the degree to which it's commenting on a number of cultures. The contemporary British culture, they arrive in the traditional Indian culture. You did that very, very wittily. I think it's a very witty film about the different cultural relationships. And then, of course, there's the Gandhi story and the archive. Now, is that what you set out to do, or did that evolve in the edit?
I did set out to do it. It was a lovely film to make, you can imagine. It was a wonderful film. And it was a voyage of discovery for me, too, about Gandhi, whom I'd always admired.
Pull your chair forward, I think.
Always admired Gandhi hugely. I kept making films during my filming life about Gandhi-esque sort of people, like Martin Luther King or other people who struggled for what they believed in against the powers that were greater than theirs. And so Gandhi was somebody I loved discovering. And I loved getting some of the flavour of India in. I'm sure the many people here who go to India quite often will probably recognise, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the chaos. I mean, that Rajpath ceremony, it was nearly an utter failure. It was pandemonium, as you probably saw. In fact, my wonderful friend and researcher and PA, Louise, is there, who was with me for about 12, 13 years. She was in the middle of that melee and had her blouse ripped off. I mean, it was a very, very dangerous, nearly out of control crowd, which I'm afraid is also typically Indian. It's a funny thing about being brought up in a society that is so cheek by jowl that people lose their sense of individuality. And Richard was terrified. It was getting out of control. And he had 8 crews, and he thought he might, if he was lucky, get 250,000 people. In the end, there were nearly 1 million people.
Really?
It was extraordinary.
It did look absolutely colossal.
I mean, what an operation, Roger.
Amazing.
So it said so much about everything, that scene, I thought, didn't it? I
Absolutely.
mean, about India particularly, and the way everyone loved Gandhi, wanted to join in and celebrate him. It also shows something of the best of the British in the way the John Mills figure and the Jinnah figure and everybody else tried to be fair, tried to do the right thing. And Gandhi recognised that, didn't he? I thought. The way he said, much as you would want to do the right thing, you must recognise that you are no longer you are masters in somebody else's home. Beautiful line, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other line I can remember from Dickie's film is that when he's on the train, somebody asks him about a reporter, I think it is, asks him, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, I think it would be a good idea. And I remember
brilliant.
That. Absolutely
Brilliant.
Fabulous. But,
Yes.
I mean, what I think is a real achievement, and I have to say, seeing it again twice in a short space of time, are the layers in your film. There are many, many layers, and each of them has their own space. You don't just kind of insert the stuff. It feels very organic. And that's what I meant about the achievement. I think the cultural mix is beautifully edited too. I mean, really, really
Wasn't
good.
it? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. It was very hard to edit. I mean, it was a lot of work because you had to tell the story and use what was going on location and the historical material and the archive and the interviews, and yet you had to progress chronologically. It was quite hard.
Very.
Yes.
It's a real
But
achievement.
interesting.
I'm very, very impressed. And I want to put something to you as we talk about some of your other films, that the thing that Jeremy and I and anyone who knew Dickie very well were aware of, as you saw and you reflected, is that although he always thought the best of people, right, he also made films about some very difficult and challenging stuff, including, I mean, the way he shot the Amritsar massacre, again, I remember it, and you caught that very well, and Ed Fox, being absolutely merciless.
Perfect
and so on.
profile.
Exactly. But he didn't shrink from that. And I think that's true about your work, that you've got a kind of optimism and a love of humanity, which I see in all the films that I've seen of yours. But you also have the world in action background, and the journalist in you is also very present. So in that way, the use of the archive, I thought, was very interesting and almost forensic in its way, that when you cut to the real body after the shooting, and there's no sound. Marvelous. Just saying this is real. Don't think this is just television. Don't think this is just a fictional film. It's real. Chapeau.
Well, thank you, Roger, very much. I did want it to be about the figure of Gandhi, not just about the fun of filmmaking, because filmmaking is funny, and you could do a whole film about that, couldn't you?
Yes.
But I really wanted it to be. I found him so moving, and the people who loved him were such wonderful people. That old man, wasn't he lovely?
Oh,
beautiful man.
fabulous.
Beautiful man.
He said he wasn't prepared for it. I love that.
Yeah, I know.
But
I know.
there's something that you all should know, but Jenny will know, and again, Jeremy would too. There was a sort of fashion for making films about films being made in those days. I was indeed part of it. I made a film about John Huston, and, there was this trend. And you, I think, transcended that trend. It wasn't just being around famous film stars and all of that. You told Gandhi's story using the device of that genre. And that's, again, to me, a part of the achievement of the film. It's another layer. It was fun to watch them. It was fun to watch the tracking shots and all of, the cultural contrast. It's witty, that business of getting all these English getting off the coach,
Yes,
and there is this woman,
Remind me not to use buffaloes again.
Yes, I love all that. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I'm just saying that's its own way. That's why I called it postmodern. You were tipping your hat towards a genre, but turning it into something much deeper, and that's great.
Thank you, Roger. Well, I was unaware of that. Myself.
No, but that's what comes of seeing it several times.
Yes.
Now, one of the reasons why I pick up this point about the journalist in you, I want to talk about, I don't know how many of you you came last week to see Go Tell It to the Judge. Is it anyone? Yeah. Yes, well, quite a few. Do you want to describe it quickly? Because I think it's an interesting comparison.
Yes.
Really.
Well, it was, as Jeremy was saying, we were so lucky in those days. If we had an idea we felt strongly about, we usually could make it. I mean, there was no commissioning editor and another one above them and another one. You just made what you wanted to make if you wanted to badly enough. And I was doing a film about the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, and I met a lovely lady called Polly Elwyn-Jones. We became good friends, and she said, my husband's doing this peculiar case about these Barnabans who've come over from an island in the Pacific, and they are seeking justice from the British government. I thought, what's all this about? And Elwyn had just been carried shoulder high by some Pacific maidens on this little island, and was delighted by the whole thing.
Bare-breasted.
Bare-breasted, absolutely, yes. And so I thought I must look into this. So I spent several months researching it with Louise very much at my side. And I discovered it was a wonderful story, and I gradually pieced it together. And it was, yes, that was journalism. You're right, I suppose, that was.
Oh, yes.
It was
you found a really important story.
And it was lovely intercutting the lawyers and the Barnabans. I mean, what a gift that was. No, I enjoyed that very
but
much.
tell them the story of the film, because it's important that you keep it alive.
It may be a bit boring for people who've seen it.
No, you don't, summarise it.
Sorry, very briefly. Their island had been mined away because it was full of phosphate, and it was left a moon landscape. I mean, grotesque. No one could live there again. And they'd been persuaded to do this for a pittance of royalties. Then when the Japanese came and took over the island, ill-treated them, a lot of them died. The few who were left were in such a bad way that we decided to cart them off to a weeny island near Fiji, where they were expected to survive, and a lot died. And it took them many, many years for it to dawn on them what a raw deal they'd had. And eventually, in the late 60s, the son of their chief decided to come to London. And it was just so lovely. People who saw it will know it was so like he didn't know who to go to, so he went to the head of the Methodist Church, because he was a Methodist minister, who said, look, I'm not a lawyer, my man. You must find a lawyer. And he found a lawyer by meeting a tramp, and the tramp wanted to commit suicide. He met him, and there was a wonderful story. I can't tell you all.
No, do tell them that story, because that's a very Jenny Barraclough story.
Okay, right. So Tabuki comes to London, and he gets a little sort of bedsitter flatlet in Victoria. And he's in Victoria, and he sees a tramp, and he wants to give him some money, but there isn't a chance. That night, Tabuki, being all alone and nothing to do, wanders out into Charing Cross Road or somewhere, goes into a cafe and sees the same poor tramp looking pretty desperate and forlorn and at the end of his tether. And Tabuki says, "My man," because he was a kind Methodist minister, "what can I do to help you? What is the matter?" And this man says, "I've had it, that's it. I've lost my wife, my job. There's nothing to live for. I'm going to commit suicide tonight at 3 o'clock. I'm going to jump off Westminster Bridge." Very serious about it. And Tabuki said, "Don't do that. Let me help you. Let me take you home. And we'll start a new life. Let me buy you some clothes and you know." So he helped him start a new life. And the tramp said, "What can I ever do to repay you?" And Tabuki said, "Just find me a lawyer. Tell me the name of a lawyer." So the tramp only knew one lawyer, in front of whom he'd been up for drunken charge. And this lawyer was called Richard Brown of Wimbledon, who was very surprised to see a large Pacific gentleman walking into his office. So was his secretary, and who said, "I'm seeking justice for my people." So the Richard Brown happened to have bumped into Elwyn once in his life, and Elwyn was a grand chap about to be Lord Chancellor, put him in touch with Elwyn, and from there the case proceeded. And that's what I made a film of.
Isn't that a wonderful story?
It's a nice story, wasn't it? You could see why I wanted to do it.
No, but also, if I may say so, the reason why I wanted you to tell it is because your humanity plus the journalistic eye is the thing that makes your film special. You love all the people, you love that kind of quirky touch. The film, I mean, again, how many of you saw the film about the Queen? It's full of these wonderfully kind of offbeat touches that are very witty, but they humanize her completely in a way that just never the other films about the Queen didn't do.
Do you know, should I just tell the ones who didn't see it? Do you know,
That's a great story.
Philip
again.
Bonham Carter, the cameraman, he knows the Queen, 'cause he used to do her Christmas messages for years. Anyway, he was standing there in Jamaica, and there was this receiving line of ministers coming past her. She was here, and Philip was there. And every time they came past, she would shake their hand, and if it was a lady, and look down. Philip held the shot for a long time, so I watched it and thought, this is an extraordinary thing. For 20 minutes, nearly, for the receiving length, she was shaking hands, looking down, shaking hands, looking down. Then she turned to Philip and said something, very sotto voce, and went on again. And I thought, what's she doing? And I asked a lady in waiting afterwards who said, you know, they have little games together sometimes to sort of amuse themselves. And she was looking down to see how many gold shoes, and Philip was counting the silver shoes. And they had a little, which I thought was so
Wonderful.
Nice. Now, who would...
Yeah, well, that particular explanation isn't included, but the long shot. No, but the shot goes on and on and on and on. And again, what I mean about the sort of wit of your filmmaking is holding that shot for such a long time. Whatever reason Philip had for doing it, the editor and you deciding to let it run means that you suddenly get a feeling of what it's like to be the Queen and shaking hand after hand after hand and have to be nice after night. And it's one of those moments really unforgettable. There's a wonderful quote from Kafka that I like very much. He says it's the job of the writer to put an ice pick in the brain, and that kind of shot does it. Where you suddenly you just remember. Anyone who's ever seen that shot will remember it because you don't see the Queen in that up close and personal in the way that you did in that shot, and you certainly don't see it for that long. And I think it's again very witty. Chapeau for that one. Now,
could I just explain? It's interesting how films happen. I did a film about Martin Luther King's legacy with all those wonderful civil rights leaders like Jesse Jackson, Andy Young, Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, you know, you remember them all. And I got to know Andy Young very well. And is David here? David Owen?
yes, he is.
Good. And there were some Rhodesia talks that you attended, didn't you, David, too, in Malta. And Andy said to me, you have got to meet Mugabe. He is the coming man. And at that time, he was thought of as a terrorist, and we shouldn't consider him. And it took me a year to get to know Mugabe at all, to get his agreement we could even go out there. He was very difficult, but at that time, we all, of course, admired him. He was very cerebral, very impressive, and seemed to be very sincere. Anyway, I find it very sad, really, that what power can do to people.
But what I meant about the comparison with you and Dickie is that you have made films about all these heroic figures. You know, that is, there's several levels to your work, one of which is to pick up invisible people. And I'd like to introduce Gail is Dead on that basis as well. Very important, perhaps your most important film, drawing attention to homeless children in London and how you just disappear.
Yes,
Gail.
I'll quickly explain. Gail, I got to know this young girl when I did a film about children's homes. And I was introduced to her by a lovely woman called Nancy David, who you'll see, as an example of how it can go wrong, that the sense of rejection and the impersonality of a large children's home can really destroy a child's confidence and happiness. And gradually, Gail went down and down, and sadly, there seemed to be nowhere to send her. She got more and more difficult, and she went from one institution to another, and ended up being introduced to drugs when she was in Borstal, and went down until finally she died. And the lady who'd introduced me to her in the first place, and I met Gail when she was in hospital, suffering from drug overdose, said to me when she heard she died, "Jenny, what a waste of a life." And I thought about all the institutions that girl had been pushed on from, with stupid rules like you can only have one letter every 6 months, you can only have a visit every twice a year. Awful, the worst thing you could do to a damaged child. And I thought, I want to make a film about her life. What a stupid way to behave to this type of young person. Roger knows all about this. And so I made a whole film about her life, which I'm proud to say did cause legislation to be, I mean, the larger children's homes were phased out. There was a special committee set up in the House of Parliament to discuss what to do about the young homeless. A couple of hostels were set up. So it did make a difference. It was very, very pleasing that.